Good Tuesday afternoon, everyone. Thank you for logging in and watching our Tuesday Bible study here for the prayer page. Before we get started, let's open up in a word of prayer and ask the Lord to be with us this afternoon. Father, thank you for this day and for the blessings that you've given us, Lord, and for how you guide and direct in our lives. Father, I just ask that you would be with me the next several minutes as we study your word. Lord, that you would speak to my heart and that you would give me the words to say to be an encouragement to your people. Well, thank you for it. In His name I pray, amen. Now, earlier, or last week or 2 weeks ago, I had announced we were planning, the plan was to start a series on the book, the Gospel of John. We are still planning on doing that, but I'm going to push that back a week. We'll start that next week. What I'm wanting to do is find my outline. That's what I want to do. What I want to do is kind of share with you my heart, the events that have taken place over the last week while I was on vacation. Just some unique circumstances that took place that God was just speaking to me or showing me just different circumstances, and you'll understand when we go over it. Before we get started, I do want to read Romans chapter 8. We're going to start at verse 26 and go through verse 28. Romans chapter 8, verses 26 through 28. Likewise, the Spirit also helpeth our infirmities, for we know not what we should pray for as we ought, but the Spirit itself maketh intercession for us with groanings which cannot be uttered. And he that searcheth the hearts knoweth what is the mind of the Spirit, because he maketh intercession for the saints according to the will of God. Then verse 28, and we know that all things work together for good to them that love God, to them who are the called according to his purpose. What I want to do, I want to focus on verse 28. But last week, during our trip during the marriage ceremony that I had the privilege of officiating at, and the trip to Disney, there was 5 things that took place that just, after they happened, God really touched my heart. Wasn't sure why, but I believe at that time I wasn't sure why, but after we got back home, I got to sit down. I keep a journal of events that have happened in my life. We actually have another journal that I write for my bride and myself. It's a scrapbook. We will collect different things from that month and we'll put it in the book. We've been doing that since we were dating. With the idea of when we have children, we'll be able to pass that along to them. So as I was putting those books and the journals together, these things came to mind, and the Lord started speaking to my heart. I was thinking of different verses, and I want to share each of these stories or circumstances with you. Now, fair warning, this ended up maybe being a bit lengthy. If it is, I do apologize in advance, but again, I just believe the Lord wants me to share these events with you. Now, the first one, and there's going to be some individuals I'm going to be talking about, with the exception of one, and I'll let you know which one. The others, I've changed these individuals' names just simply to protect their privacy. And the first one I want to talk about was the wedding that I officiated. Now, the couple that was getting married, the bride, originally her aunt was supposed to officiate the wedding, but 2 days before Christmas, this lady was shot and killed by her husband, who then turned around and shot and killed himself. The adult daughter, I'm going to use the name Andrea. Andrea was at the home at the time, but didn't hear the gunshot. she discovered them, I believe it was later that night or the next morning, that her parents were dead. Now, the man that did the shooting was her stepfather. Her biological father, when she was about 7, was murdered walking down the street. And to this day, they still don't know who the murderer was. So she's had that. Then 2 days before Christmas, her mother is killed by the hands of her stepfather, who in turn kills himself. Now, myself, and I'm sure you'd be the same way, would be mind blown, devastated by all these circumstances, maybe even questioning God. Well, I had the opportunity to meet that young lady, Andrea, after I officiated the wedding. This was at the reception. And the conversation I had with her just blew me away. She loves the Lord. She's a strong Christian. And she sat there and looked at me and said, I've forgiven, referring to her stepfather, I've forgiven him. 3 months, only 3 months after her mother is murdered, she's standing there forgiving her stepfather for murdering her mother. And this verse came to mind, Ephesians 4:32. Be ye kind one. Oh, let me actually go back to verse 30. It says, and grieve not the Holy Spirit of God, whereby ye are sealed unto the day of redemption. Notice verse 31. Let all bitterness and wrath and anger and clamor and evil speaking be put away from you with all malice, and be ye kind one to another, tender-hearted, forgiving one another, even as God for Christ's sake hath forgiven you. If anybody on this planet had the quote right to not forgive somebody, it was Andrea. But she said, Ron, I've forgiven him. I'm sad, but I've forgiven him. Being angry, I'm trying to remember exactly how she put it, but in essence, what she said was, being angry with him is not going to help me at all. God has a reason, God has a purpose, and I've forgiven this man. Just blown away. I've been, in high school, I was a chaplain of a class. I worked at a summer camp. I worked with people in Bible college. I've been basically doing this for 33 years. 33 years, I have never seen anybody with such a forgiving spirit as Andrea. And had our trip ended at that point, I'd have said it was well worth it. But it didn't. I'm going to go on. So that was on March the 25th. And again, I actually did put together an outline. We're going to leave it in the comment section as well. We'll leave it in the sermon outline section of our website. So that was on March the 25th. March the 27th. No, let me back up. So March the 25th was the wedding. Then afterwards, my wife and I drove from near Tampa, Florida, to Orlando to Disney. And we arrived that late the evening of the 25th. The 26th, we went to Disney. We went to Magic Kingdom. We went to Magic Kingdom again on the 27th. And, of course, it's spring break. There's all these people there. In the afternoon of the 27th, I was chuckling to myself because I was like, all these people. And having lived there before near that area, so I was like, it's funny I haven't seen anybody. Well, just need to be a bit more patient. We got to the ride that's with the 7 dwarfs. We're standing in line in the Fast Pass section, which, by the way, off subject here, if you go to Disney, you've got to go with a Fast Pass. Look it up on the website. I promise you it is the way to go. So we're standing in line with the Fast Pass, and I look up, and about 4 people ahead of me, there's this young lady, a young mother with her daughter. And I'm looking at her, and I'm thinking, she looks familiar. And I realized that she looks a lot like a friend of mine named Brittany. So I pull up my phone, pull up Facebook, pull up the picture of Brittany, pull up the picture of her infant daughter, and sure enough, it was her. So I kind of cut my way front just to say hi to her. And both of us were like, wow, we hadn't seen each other in 12 years. She found me on Facebook about a year ago, and we've been following each other. And when I knew Brittany, I worked at Chick-fil-A in South Florida. She was still in high school. She was a teenager. And now she's married to a wonderful man. Had a chance to meet her husband after the ride. Has 2 beautiful daughters. Doing very, very well for herself. And as I was thinking of that, a passage toward the end of your Bible, 2 John. 2 John chapter 1, there's only one chapter, verse 4. It says here, I rejoice greatly that I found of thy children walking in truth, as we have received a commandment from the Father. Just to see Brittany, who was this, I don't want to say awkward teenager, but you know how teenagers can be. She was your typical teenage girl. Blossomed to this beautiful young lady who loves the Lord, who has a beautiful family, doing so well for herself. And to think that, I was her manager at the time when she worked at Chick-fil-A, and she had commented how she enjoyed working with me. I'm going to pat my back here. Bear with me. But she'd said how much she liked working with me, how much, how kind I was, and just bragging on. And to know that I made an impact in her life reminded me of this verse, and reminded me as well, it doesn't matter what line of work that you're in. You don't have to be in the ministry full time. Somebody out there is looking at you. There's somebody out there. I don't care who you are. There is somebody that is looking at you. And you've got to keep that in your mind as you go about your daily business, especially as a Christian. You've got to keep that in mind. Some people refer to it as an eternal worldview, meaning one day you're going to stand before the Lord and give an account of what you have done, whether it's good, whether it's bad. And I know for myself, I want to be able to stand before the Lord and have him say, well done, thou good and faithful servant. And so keep that in mind. There are all kinds of people out there that are watching you, and many times you may not even know it. That same day on March the 27th, while we were, matter of fact, it was shortly after I had seen Brittany, we hugged her and her family and said goodbye. We got a message, an instant message. My wife did. There's a lady that she knows. I'm going to refer to her as Jerry. She was with. She was driving. She had 2 of her 3 grandchildren with her. She was T-boned by a truck, and we got all we got initially was that there was this accident. These individuals were in the vehicle, that the accident was serious. And quite frankly, it was to the point where mentally we were supposed to stay one more day at Disney. and then leave on the 29th to go to Orlando, to go to another city, then go home. However, after this instant message, I was mentally preparing myself to pack everything up and head back home. Well, come to find out, the grandmother was seriously injured. Broken pelvis, broken spine. She's going through therapy right now, a lot of pain. She needs our prayers. But her 2 grandchildren basically walked away with a couple of scratches or cuts. But normally that lady would have, she has 3 grandchildren. Normally she would have had the 3rd. However, events took place where the 3rd was not able to go with them at that time, which is really a miracle, because if that 3rd grandchild had been in that vehicle, I assure you, seeing that the damage to that vehicle, we would be making funeral arrangements. But she was not. God was watching them. And it reminded me of a passage in Psalms chapter 125, verse 2. David writes here, "As the mountains are round about Jerusalem, so the Lord is round about his people from henceforth even forever." God was watching out for that family. God knew what was going to happen. And he did not want that little girl in that van. He still has plans for her. And he allowed all of them, quite frankly, to live. The grandmother's going to be in some pain, but she will recover. God was protecting them. And God will protect us. Here in Chipley, yesterday we had some pretty nasty weather go through. I actually had left here to drive to town. When I got on the main highway, I took a look. There were some really bad black clouds that were churning up to my northwest. I did a 180 and went right back home. Tomorrow, we're supposed to have even worse weather. They're talking about long-lasting tornadoes. It's springtime. It's April. This part of the country, that happens. We may not be in the tornado alley, quote unquote, but the Southeast, we have our fair share, especially during April and May. You don't believe me? Type Tuscaloosa tornado April 2011 and you'll find out. That was the worst tornado disaster in U.S. history. But for myself and for all of us, God has a plan for us, and if we trust him, he will protect us. Doesn't mean bad things won't happen, but he's still watching us, and we can take comfort in that God will protect us. 2 more and I'm finished. On March the 29th, that was the day we basically left Orlando and was heading home, but we took the bit of a scenic route. We visited Plant City, Florida, where I pastored a church for a little over a year, almost a year and a half. Then we went to Valrico, Florida, which is between Plant City and Tampa, or Lakeland and Tampa. It's right on Highway 60. We went to the Chick-fil-A in Valrico. I worked there as an assistant manager for 3 years. And the owner-operator and his wife, they're still there. His son was working there. His son basically came up to maybe about here the last time I saw him. Now he's about up to here. I asked him, how's the weather up there? And not only that, I left there in October of 2007, so it's been almost 10 years. There was 4 people that worked there when I was there that are still there. And they were all there at that time. and we were able to just sit down and catch up and reminisce about things that God has done for us, as well as catch up and share what God has done for us since we left there. And as I was thinking of that, I thought of a passage in Philippians chapter 1. Verses 3 and 6. Paul writes here, he says, I thank my God upon every remembrance of you, always in every prayer of mine for you all, making requests with joy. By the way, you can see here that Paul is Southern. If you don't believe it, let's take again verse 4. Always in every prayer of mine for y'all. So yeah, he was Southern. For you all, making requests with joy, for your fellowship in the gospel from the first day until now. And then verse 6, being confident of this very thing, that he which hath begun a good work in you will perform it unto the day of Jesus Christ. But specifically, I was looking at verse 3. I thank my God upon every remembrance of you. There was a saying that was told to me many years ago, when my grandma Tompkins passed away. Someone came to me and they said, there's one thing that death cannot destroy, it's memory. Memory is the one thing that death cannot destroy. And even though it'd been 10 years, I still, remember funny stories, situations, and just events that really impacted my life. And even before Chick-fil-A, I can go back. There's so many things that have happened in my life that God has allowed to impact my life. And that's one reason why I keep a journal, so that I won't forget those memories. I won't forget those things. And it's kind of neat that, some people may get annoyed with it, but one of the things I do appreciate about Facebook is, the memory section on this day. There's a few things in there that I would just, I'll see them and I'm like, I could have done without remembering that. But there's a lot more that I'm like, yeah, I remember that. That was neat. That was cool. And then the last one is one that we all of us, or most of us, are aware of. The horrible accident that took place in Texas with the church bus when those elderly saints were killed. Even when I heard about that news, I really didn't even have to think long about it. When I heard of the news, and then listened to a statement given by the church pastor, this passage in Proverbs came to mind. Proverbs 3, 5, and 6. Trust in the Lord with all thine heart, and lean not unto thine own understanding. In all thy ways acknowledge him, and he shall direct thy path. So you'll notice there's the word and in both verses. The first thing, we need to trust in the Lord with all thine heart. But not just that, we also, when we're trusting in him, you don't lean on your own understanding. You acknowledge him in everything. When you do that, he'll direct our paths. We don't know why these folks were killed, as far as what God's purpose or reasoning for it. Now, we strongly suspect or believe what was the cause of the accident. They believe that the other gentleman, the young man in the truck, was texting and driving. So we may find that out, but we may not, especially the families in the church, they may not be able to fully appreciate or find out the reason why, especially this many people in one church. Can you imagine? If you go to a church of 2,000 or 3,000, may not be as much, but when you're in a church of even, let's say, 300, which is about the average size of a church, 13 people is going to have an impact. it's going to have a devastating impact. And those people, I'm sure they're asking themselves, why? Why did this have to happen? And if they were sitting here and ask me that question, I would tell them, I don't know. I wish I had an answer for you, but I don't. All I know is that God has a plan. God has a reason for it. We need to just trust in Him. He'll direct our paths. And part of that directing our paths is that He will at some point lead us to that answer. Will it be on this side of heaven? Not necessarily. But eventually we will find why. And all we can do is just trust in the Lord and then pray for the families. And I would encourage you to do that. Certainly pray for the, excuse me, for the families of that accident. Our friend that we refer to as Jerry, God knows who she is. That's not her real name, but God knows who she is. Just remember her in prayer. Remember our friend Andrea in prayer, whose parents were murdered. You know, she has that forgiving spirit, but she's also human. You know, there's going to be times when she's going to miss them, especially with Mother's Day coming up. You know, that's going to be hard. So I would ask you that you would pray for them, and then pray for two other individuals. I'm just going to list them as unspoken. They don't want their names to be mentioned, but both of them have some pretty serious health issues that are going on right now. One of them will actually be having surgery tomorrow. So just remember, I would appreciate that you would remember them in prayer. And as well, if you remember me in prayer, one reason I didn't do a Bible study until now was that we got back last Wednesday from Disney, but I knew it was going to take a bit out of me, and it did. And you can kind of hear it in my voice. Still kind of, but again, I just wanted to share these thoughts and hope that it is a blessing to you. Now, don't forget, on Friday, we'll pick right back up. We're almost done with our series on Psalms 23. We're going to be looking at the very last part of Psalms chapter 23, verse 5. And then next week on the 11th, we'll start our series on the book of John, the Gospel of John. So until then, have a great week, and God bless.